An injured goldfinch had been chirping non-stop for 5 days at the same window. "This thing is going to drive me crazy," grumbled Arthur. But when he finally paid attention to what the little bird was trying to show him, the discovery changed everything. Before we begin today's story, let me know where you're watching from. Feel free to grab some coffee or get comfortable on the couch. And please don't forget to support us. You just have to hit the like button, and I'll know you enjoy this type of story. So, you ready? Let's begin. The morning began like any other on Hope Street. The sun rose shyly between the grey clouds, and Arthur opened the kitchen window to brew his coffee. At 65, retired for 3 years, he had developed an almost military-like routine. Wake up at 6, strong coffee, newspaper on the porch. He was a practical man who had no patience for romanticizing nature. That's when he heard it, a sharp, repetitive chirp that seemed to be coming from the yard next door. Arthur furrowed his brow and tried to ignore it, focusing on the newspaper's headlines. But the sound persisted, growing more insistent. "What an annoying noise," he muttered, covering his ear with his free hand as he turned the page. The house next door belonged to Eleanor, a woman he had known for years, but rarely spoke to beyond polite greetings. She had always been an independent woman, too proud to accept help, and he respected that. To each their own, as it had always been. The chirping continued throughout his breakfast. Arthur tried turning on the television to drown out the sound, but the high volume only made everything more irritating. He went out to the porch, hoping for some peace, but the sound seemed even closer there. "Must be a cat attacking a nest," he thought, shaking his head in disapproval. But as the hours passed, something about that chirp began to bother him in a different way. It wasn't just the noise. There was an urgency to it, a desperation he couldn't completely ignore. It was noon when he finally got up from his armchair and went to the window overlooking Eleanor's yard. He searched for the source of the sound, hoping to find a simple situation he could resolve quickly. That's when he saw the little goldfinch. The fledgling was on the ledge of the neighbor's kitchen window, one wing clearly injured, hanging at an odd angle. But what caught Arthur's attention wasn't just the bird's condition, it was where it was. The small animal always positioned itself in the same spot near the glass, as if trying to get into the house. "Strange," Arthur murmured. "Why doesn't it fly somewhere else?" He watched for a few minutes. The goldfinch would chirp, stop, look through the glass, and then start again. It was a pattern, almost as if it were trying to communicate. Arthur shook his head. "Now I'm imagining things. It's just an injured bird." But as the day wore on, the fledgling's behavior remained the same, always at the same window, always looking into the house, always chirping with the same urgency. By the afternoon, Arthur couldn't concentrate on anything. The sound had become a constant, irritating echo in his mind, even when he left the house. He tried to take a walk around the block to escape, but when he returned, there was the goldfinch in the same spot with the same determination. "This creature is going to drive me crazy," he grumbled, closing all his windows. But even with the house sealed shut, he couldn't stop thinking about the little bird. There was something unsettling about its persistence, something that challenged everything Arthur knew about animal behavior. As the sun began to set, painting the sky orange, Arthur made a decision. He grabbed a ladder from the shed and decided to investigate more closely. Maybe if he could shoo the bird away, or even help it somehow, he would finally get some peace. He had no idea he was about to discover something that would change not only his day, but his entire perspective on the signs we choose to ignore. Arthur positioned the ladder against the wall, separating his yard from Eleanor's, and climbed carefully. The goldfinch, seeing him approach, didn't fly away. Instead, it intensified its chirps, as if someone was finally paying attention. "Easy there, little guy," Arthur said, extending his hand cautiously. "I'm going to try to help you." But as he got closer to Eleanor's kitchen window, something beyond the bird caught his eye. The curtain was only slightly ajar, but through the gap he could see inside the house, and what he saw confused him. The kitchen was in disarray. Dirty dishes were piled in the sink, a broken coffee mug was on the floor, and... was that spoiled food on the table? Arthur frowned. Eleanor had always been a meticulous woman, almost obsessive about cleanliness. Seeing her kitchen in that state was like seeing a painting outside its frame. It just didn't make sense. "Eleanor?" he called, tapping lightly on the glass. Silence. The goldfinch chirped louder, as if approving of his attempt to communicate. "Eleanor, are you okay?" Arthur insisted, a thread of concern now in his voice. Still nothing. He climbed down the ladder and walked to Eleanor's front door. He rang the doorbell once, twice, 3 times. He knocked. He called her name again. "That's strange," he muttered. "Her car is in the driveway." It was then he realized something he should have noticed before. How long had it been since he'd seen Eleanor? He tried to remember the last time he'd greeted her on the street, the last time he'd seen lights on in her house at night. A week, 2. The goldfinch continued its urgent chorus, now seeming even more desperate. Arthur went back home, but an unease had settled in his chest like a weight. He tried to convince himself he was overreacting. Eleanor had probably gone to visit a relative, or maybe she was sick and preferred to stay in bed. "It's none of my business," he said to himself, but the words sounded hollow. During dinner, he barely touched his food. Through the window, he could see the silhouette of the tiny goldfinch still in the same position, a diminutive figure against the dark glass of the neighboring house. Why doesn't it give up? Arthur thought. Why does it keep trying to get into that house? Night fell, and with it came a restlessness Arthur couldn't explain. He lay down, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time he was about to drift off, he remembered the desperate chirps, the messy kitchen, the absolute silence coming from the house next door. At 2 in the morning, he got up and went to the window. To his surprise, the goldfinch was still there, a small shadow silhouetted against the faint light of the street lamp. "Doesn't this thing sleep?" he murmured, but there was something almost heroic in the small creature's persistence. That's when a memory hit him like a lightning bolt. Eleanor always fed the birds in her yard. Every day, religiously, she would scatter crumbs and seeds near her kitchen window. Arthur had seen her do it for years, always at the same time, always with the same loving care. If the goldfinch was injured, maybe it had sought out Eleanor for help. And if she wasn't showing up? "No," Arthur said aloud, as if to push the thought away. "I'm just imagining things." But deep down, an insistent voice whispered that maybe the little bird knew something he was reluctant to accept. Maybe those chirps weren't just cries for help for itself. Maybe they were an alarm. Dawn brought with it a determination Arthur hadn't expected to feel. After a sleepless night, filled with fragmented sleep interrupted by the distant chirps, he made a decision. He prepared his coffee in silence, but his eyes were fixed on Eleanor's kitchen window. The goldfinch was still there, now visibly weaker, but still persistent in its vigil. "I can't ignore this anymore," he said to himself. He dressed quickly and went out into the yard. The morning air was cool, filled with the scent of the flowers Eleanor so lovingly tended to, or used to. Because now, looking more closely, Arthur noticed that her garden also showed signs of neglect. The plants that were once the pride of the neighborhood were wilted, some already yellowed from lack of water. He approached the fence that divided the 2 yards and called out again, "Eleanor, please, answer if you can hear me." The ensuing silence was deafening, broken only by the increasingly faint chirps of the goldfinch. Arthur knew he had to act, but uncertainty paralyzed him. What if he was overreacting? What if Eleanor simply didn't want to be disturbed? She had always valued her privacy. That's when he remembered Rose, the woman who lived across the street. She and Eleanor had been friends for decades and used to chat on the sidewalk almost every day. He crossed the street hurriedly and rang her doorbell. "Arthur?" "What a surprise," said Rose, opening the door with a smile that quickly turned to concern upon seeing his expression. "Is something wrong?" "Sorry to bother you so early, Rose. It's about Eleanor. Have you spoken with her lately?" Rose's face wrinkled in confusion. "Eleanor? Now that you mention it, I haven't seen her for at least a week. I thought it was strange, because she always waves when I go to pick up my mail." "Have you tried talking to her?" "I tried ringing her bell yesterday, but no one answered. I figured maybe she'd gone to visit her daughter. You know how it is." Arthur felt a tightness in his chest. "Rose, I think something's wrong. Her kitchen is a mess, the garden is neglected, and there's an injured bird that's been chirping at her window for days." Rose's eyes widened. "A bird? Eleanor has always been crazy about birds. If there's an injured one and she's not taking care of it." "That's exactly what worries me." Rose didn't hesitate. "Let's go over there, now." The two walked quickly back to Eleanor's house. Rose had a spare key, something Eleanor had insisted on for emergencies, though she always stressed it should never be used unless absolutely necessary. "I think this counts as an emergency," Rose muttered, fumbling for the key in her purse. Meanwhile, Arthur watched the goldfinch more closely. The small animal was visibly exhausted, but its eyes shone with a determination that touched something deep in his heart. "Hang in there, little guy," he whispered. "We're going to find out what's going on." Rose found the key and, with trembling hands, inserted it into the lock. The door opened with a soft creak, revealing a dark and silent hallway. "Eleanor, it's us, Rose and Arthur," Rose called out, her voice echoing through the empty house. The smell that hit them was unmistakable, a mixture of spoiled food, stale air, and something else neither of them wanted to identify. Arthur followed Rose down the hall, his heart pounding in his chest. They passed the living room, where newspapers from a week ago were still on the coffee table, and headed for the kitchen. It was there they found the first real clues of what had happened, and they understood why the goldfinch hadn't given up. The kitchen told a silent, troubling story. On the table, a plate of completely mouldy food and a coffee cup with a greenish film on its surface. On the floor, shards of broken pottery, and near the refrigerator, a small container of birdseed tipped over, its contents scattered across the tile floor. "My God," whispered Rose, placing a hand on her chest. Arthur surveyed the scene with growing apprehension. It was as if Eleanor had simply stopped in the middle of her daily activities. "Eleanor!" shouted Rose, no longer caring about composure. "Where are you?" And a faint sound came from the back of the house, something between a moan and an attempt to reply. They exchanged a look and ran toward the sound, passing through the living room and into the hallway leading to the bedrooms. "Eleanor? Is that you?" Arthur called. "Here," came a voice, almost inaudible, from the room at the end of the hall. Rose reached the ajar door first and pushed it open gently. What she saw made her gasp and cover her face with her hands. Eleanor was lying in bed, but not sleeping. Her eyes were open, glazed over, and she seemed to be struggling to focus on her surroundings. She was visibly dehydrated, with cracked lips and pale, almost translucent skin. "Eleanor, Eleanor, dear, what happened?" Rose rushed to her side, holding her friend's hand. "Rose." Eleanor's voice was a mere thread. "Is that really you?" "Yes, it's me. I'm here. Arthur is here too." Eleanor tried to sit up but could barely lift her head. "I don't know. Don't know how many days. I lost track of time. I tried to get up, but—" "Don't worry about it now," said Arthur, already pulling out his phone. "I'm calling an ambulance." While Arthur spoke with the 911 operator, Rose held Eleanor's hand and tried to understand what had happened. "Dear, how long have you been like this? What do you remember?" Eleanor closed her eyes, struggling to concentrate. "I was feeding the birds, like I always do. And suddenly everything got foggy. I couldn't remember if I'd eaten, if I'd taken my pills. Your pills. Rose glanced at the nightstand and saw several medicine bottles. Some were empty, others looked untouched for days. I tried to remember, but it was like my mind was full of fog. And then I got so weak I couldn't get out of bed anymore. Arthur approached after finishing the call. The ambulance is on its way. How is she? Confused, dehydrated. I think she had some sort of episode, maybe related to her medication. It was then that Eleanor weakly gripped Rose's arm. "The bird," she whispered. "There's an injured bird out there. I was trying to take care of it before this happened. Please, don't let it die." Arthur and Rose looked at each other. The goldfinch. All this time it hadn't just been asking for help for itself. "We'll take care of it," Arthur promised, surprising himself with the emotion in his voice. "And you too." Eleanor managed a weak but genuine smile. "He's so small, but so determined. He kept trying to help me when I couldn't get out of bed." Outside, as if it knew it had finally been heard, the goldfinch let out a softer chirp, almost like a sigh of relief. The arrival of the ambulance brought a flurry of activity to the quiet street. The paramedics worked efficiently, assessing Eleanor's condition, while Arthur and Rose explained the situation. "Looks like severe dehydration and possible medication confusion," said one of the paramedics, checking Eleanor's vital signs. "She probably got confused about which meds to take and when, which could have caused a cascade effect." "Is she going to be okay?" asked Rose, holding her friend's hand as the team prepared her for transport. "With proper hydration and the right medication adjustment, yes, but you were lucky to find her when you did. A few more days and—" The paramedic didn't finish the sentence, but everyone understood the gravity of the situation. As Eleanor was carefully placed on the stretcher, she looked at Arthur with eyes that, despite their weakness, shone with gratitude. "The bird," she whispered again. "I'll take care of him," Arthur promised, surprised by his own determination. "Don't you worry." After the ambulance departed, taking Eleanor and Rose, who insisted on going with her, Arthur stood alone in the yard, looking at the small goldfinch that still kept its vigil at the window. "So that's it," he said aloud, as if the bird could understand. "You knew she needed help, didn't you?" The goldfinch looked at him with its small, bright eyes, tilting its head as if to confirm the question. Arthur realized he needed to act quickly. The small bird was visibly weak and dehydrated, just as Eleanor had been. He went back to his house and looked up information online about caring for injured goldfinches. After a few minutes of research, he prepared a small box lined with soft towels and a shallow dish of water. "Let's see if I can convince you to accept some help," he murmured, cautiously approaching the goldfinch. To his surprise, the little bird didn't try to flee. In fact, it seemed almost relieved when Arthur gently scooped it up in his large, calloused hands. "Easy there, little hero," Arthur said, carefully examining the injured wing. "It's nothing we can't fix." He took the goldfinch home and settled it into the makeshift box on his kitchen table. The bird drank water eagerly and pecked at some cookie crumbs Arthur offered. "Incredible," Arthur murmured, watching the small creature gradually recover. "You spent days trying to warn us about her, even while you were hurt." As he cared for the goldfinch, Arthur couldn't stop thinking about everything that had happened. How had he been so blind to the signs? How had he not noticed Eleanor was in danger? And more importantly, how had a tiny, injured bird been more attentive and compassionate than he, a grown man? He picked up the phone and called the hospital for news about Eleanor. "She's stable," Rose informed him. "The doctors say the hydration is working, and they've already started adjusting her medication. She'll need to stay for a few days of observation, but she's going to make a full recovery." Arthur felt a profound sense of relief wash over him. "And the bird?" asked Rose. Arthur looked at the goldfinch, now resting peacefully in its makeshift box. He's recovering. The wing doesn't seem to be broken, just sprained. With some care, he should be flying again in a few days. Eleanor will be so happy to hear that. She hasn't stopped asking about him. After hanging up, Arthur sat at his kitchen table, watching the little goldfinch that had changed everything. It was strange how such a fragile creature had shown a determination and loyalty that he himself had never demonstrated. "You taught me a lesson, little guy," he said softly, "about paying attention, about truly caring." The goldfinch let out a soft chirp, as if accepting the acknowledgement. The following days brought a completely new routine for Arthur. For the first time in years, his mornings didn't just start with coffee and the newspaper, but with the delicate task of checking on how the goldfinch had spent the night. "Good morning, little fella," he would always say, approaching the box on the kitchen table. The bird had grown accustomed to his presence and would greet him with soft chirps whenever Arthur appeared. The wing was healing well. It could already move it without apparent pain, and Arthur noticed the small animal was starting to show more energy. On the third day, Rose returned from the hospital with good news. "Eleanor is so much better," she announced, walking into Arthur's kitchen. "The doctor's got her medication right, and she's already lucid. She wants to see you tomorrow." "Of course," Arthur replied, but his eyes turned worriedly to the goldfinch. "And what about the little guy? Will she still be able to care for him when she gets back?" Rose watched the bird fondly. "Actually, we talked about that. Eleanor thinks it might be best if you keep looking after him for a while. She was so touched to hear how you saved them both." Arthur felt something strange in his chest, a mix of pride and responsibility he hadn't experienced in a long time. "I've never taken care of a bird before," he admitted. "Apparently, you're a natural," Rose smiled. "Look how well he's doing." It was true. The goldfinch had gained weight, and its feathers shone with renewed health. More importantly, it had developed a trust in Arthur that deeply touched the man's heart. That afternoon, Arthur decided to take the box out to the yard, thinking the fresh air might do the little patient some good. He placed it on a patio table and sat down to watch. The goldfinch looked around with renewed interest, clearly feeling stronger. Suddenly, it flapped its wings experimentally and, to Arthur's surprise, managed to lift off for a few seconds before landing gently on the edge of the box. "Wow!" exclaimed Arthur. "You're almost ready to fly for real." But instead of seeming eager to leave, the goldfinch went back inside the box and settled down, as if to say, "Not yet. It's not time." Arthur smiled, intuitively understanding that the small creature wasn't just recovering physically. Something deeper was happening, a connection that went beyond medical care. That night, as he took one last look at the goldfinch before bed, Arthur reflected on how his life had changed in just a few days. The solitary routine that once satisfied him now seemed empty compared to the purpose he felt in caring for another living being. "You know," he said softly to the sleeping bird, "I think you saved me just as much as I saved you." The next day, Arthur and Rose went to visit Eleanor at the hospital. She was sitting up in bed, colour back in her cheeks, and a genuine smile that Arthur hadn't seen in a very long time. "Arthur!" she exclaimed upon seeing him. "How can I ever thank you? Rose told me everything." Arthur felt his face flush. "I just paid attention to what I should have been paying attention to a long time ago." "And how is my little hero?" Arthur smiled, pulling his phone from his pocket to show the pictures he'd taken of the goldfinch. "Take a look." Eleanor held the phone with hands that were still a bit shaky, but her eyes filled with tears of joy as she saw the images of the recovered bird. "He's beautiful, so strong." Then she looked at Arthur with an expression he would never forget. "You two saved each other, didn't you?" Arthur nodded, finally understanding the profound truth behind her words. "I think so, Eleanor." I think so. Outside the hospital window, a flock of goldfinches sang cheerfully in the trees, as if celebrating the recovery of one of their own. Eleanor's discharge brought a new dynamic to Hope Street. Arthur had offered to help with her transition back home, and Rose organized a schedule to ensure someone was always checking on how she was adapting to her new medication times. "It's strange," Eleanor said, sitting in her favorite armchair in the living room, "how a bit of mental fog can make you realize what truly matters." Arthur sat in the chair beside her, the box with the goldfinch carefully placed on a small table between them. The little bird watched Eleanor with what seemed to be genuine recognition. "I vaguely remember you trying to help me," she said to the goldfinch, gently extending a finger. "Even when I couldn't take care of you anymore, you didn't give up on me." The bird moved closer and softly touched Eleanor's finger with its beak, a gesture so tender it made Arthur's eyes well up. "I think it's time," Arthur said softly. "Time for what? To let him fly? His wing is completely healed, and he's been patient with us for a long time." Eleanor nodded, but Arthur noticed the hesitation in her eyes. "I'm scared," she admitted. "What if he gets hurt again? What if he doesn't know how to take care of himself?" Arthur understood the feeling perfectly. Over the past few weeks, caring for the goldfinch had become more than a responsibility. It had become a source of purpose and connection he didn't want to lose. "But we can't keep him caged for our own need to feel useful," he said, more to himself than to Eleanor. "He was born to fly." Eleanor smiled sadly. "You're right. I've always known that, but it's hard to let go of someone who helped you find yourself." They decided to do the release in Eleanor's yard, where it all began. Arthur carried the box outside, while Eleanor followed slowly, still regaining her strength. "This is perfect," Eleanor said, pointing to a spot near the tree where she used to scatter seeds for the birds. "He knows this place." Arthur gently opened the box. The goldfinch looked out, then at him, then at Eleanor. For a moment, it seemed to hesitate, as if it also felt the difficulty of saying goodbye. "Go on, little guy," Arthur encouraged. "It's time for you to go back where you belong." The goldfinch hopped out of the box and perched on the edge for an instant. Then, with a soft chirp that sounded almost like a thank you, it spread its wings and took flight. But instead of flying far away immediately, it circled the yard a few times, singing loud and clear, as if announcing its freedom to the world. "Listen," whispered Eleanor, holding Arthur's arm. "He's calling the others." It was true. Suddenly other goldfinches appeared, flying from nearby trees and joining the first in a celebratory aerial ballet. The small flock flew in circles above the yard, their songs blending into a symphony of pure joy. Arthur and Eleanor stood watching in reverent silence until the birds finally flew away, disappearing among the treetops of the neighborhood. "He found his family," Eleanor said, tears rolling down her cheeks. "And we found ours," Arthur replied, surprising himself with the sincerity of his words. Eleanor looked at him curiously. "You don't have to be alone anymore, Arthur. Neither do I. This little bird taught us that caring for one another is what makes us human." Arthur nodded, feeling a profound transformation happening in his heart, an opening that had been closed for so long he had forgotten what it was like to live truly connected to other beings. In the weeks that followed, Hope Street transformed from a simple row of houses into a true community. Arthur had discovered that caring for the goldfinch had awakened in him a genuine interest in the well-being of other living creatures, including his human neighbors. Every morning he would visit Eleanor for coffee, not out of obligation or pity, but because he genuinely enjoyed her company. He discovered she had a gentle wisdom and a sense of humor he had never noticed during all those years of polite greetings. "You know," Eleanor said one morning as they watched the birds in the yard, "before all this happened I thought I was fine on my own. I thought independence meant not needing anyone." Arthur stirred the sugar in his coffee thoughtfully. "I thought the same thing. I figured keeping my distance from others was safer, simpler, and now I realize I was just afraid to truly care." Eleanor smiled. "It's funny how an injured bird can teach you so much about human connection." It was at that moment they heard a familiar chirp from the tree in the yard. They both looked up and saw the goldfinch perched on a low branch, not alone, but accompanied by another, slightly smaller bird. "Look at that," Eleanor sighed. "He brought someone special." The pair of goldfinches sang together for a few minutes before flying to the tree on the other side of the yard, where they began to examine the upper branches with obvious interest. "I think they're looking for a place to build a nest," Arthur observed. "How wonderful! We're going to have a new family in the yard." Over the next few days, Arthur and Eleanor watched, fascinated, as the goldfinches built their nest. It was a meticulous and collaborative effort, with each bird bringing twigs, leaves, and soft materials they found nearby. "They work so well together," commented Eleanor, watching the birds through the kitchen window. "They each know exactly what to do." Arthur nodded. "It's like they have a shared purpose." "Just like us," Eleanor said softly. Arthur looked at her curiously. "You took care of me when I needed it. I learned about patience and care from you, and now we're taking care of this little family that's forming together." It was true. Without consciously realizing it, Arthur and Eleanor had developed their own routine of mutual care. She would prepare special lunches when she noticed he was tired, and he would make sure she took her medications correctly and had company on her tougher days. Rose also became an integral part of this new dynamic, visiting regularly and bringing news from the rest of the neighborhood. What started as an emergency had evolved into a genuine network of support and friendship. "You know," Rose said one afternoon, as the three of them watched the goldfinches feeding their newborn chicks, "other people on the street have started to comment on the change here." "What kind of change?" asked Arthur. "How you've become a family, how you're always together, looking after each other and the animals. It's inspiring other people to pay more attention to their neighbors." Eleanor smiled. Who would have thought a little injured bird could start a revolution of kindness? "It wasn't the bird," said Arthur, looking at his two friends. "It was the choice to pay attention, to truly care." At that moment, the goldfinch chicks began to chirp in the nest, their parents flying quickly to feed them. It was a cycle of life, care, and love that perfectly mirrored what had happened among the three humans. Life had become infinitely richer when they stopped living just for themselves. The end of summer brought a special milestone. The goldfinch chicks were ready to leave the nest. Arthur, Eleanor, and Rose gathered in the yard on a sunny morning to witness this important moment. "They look nervous," observed Rose, pointing to the two fledglings peering cautiously over the edge of the nest. "Just like us, when we need to take important steps in life," reflected Eleanor. Arthur smiled, remembering how nervous he had felt when he decided to truly care about the well-being of others. The first flight is always the scariest. They watched in reverent silence as the father goldfinch, the very one who had saved Eleanor months ago, encouraged the chicks with soft songs. The mother flew to a nearby branch, demonstrating that it was safe to leave the nest. The first chick hesitated for long minutes before finally spreading its tiny wings and making an unsteady flight to the branch, where its mother waited. The second followed soon after with a bit more confidence. "Beautiful," sighed Eleanor. "Each new generation learning to fly, to care, to trust." "Just like people," said Arthur thoughtfully. "We learn from each other how to be brave." No, it was then that Rose made an announcement that surprised them. "You know, I've been thinking a lot about the three of you. I mean, you two and me," she smiled. What we've built here is so special that I don't want it to be lost well, when one of us is no longer here." Arthur and Eleanor looked at her attentively, sensing the seriousness in her voice. "I've been talking with other neighbors, and many would love to have what we have, this sense of community, of genuine care." "What are you proposing?" asked Eleanor. "That we organize a weekly get-together here in the yard, a time for neighbors to get to know each other better, share concerns, and help one another." Arthur initially felt a knot in his stomach. The idea of more people, more social responsibility, still made him a little anxious. "It doesn't have to be anything grand," Rose continued, as if sensing his hesitation. "Just a coffee afternoon on Saturdays, a place where people can be genuine with each other." Eleanor gently took Arthur's hand. "What do you think? It would be like extending our family." Arthur looked at the goldfinches, now flying joyfully with their chicks among the trees, teaching them about the wider world beyond the yard. There was something profoundly symbolic in that moment, about expanding horizons, about sharing the love they had found. I think that would be nice," he said, surprising himself, "but on one condition." "What's that?" "That we always set aside some time to watch the birds, to remember how this all started." Rose laughed cheerfully. "Perfect. It will be our special ritual." And so, the Goldfinch Gathering was born, a weekly meeting that started with 3 people and gradually grew to include a dozen neighbors. Some came seeking companionship, others to share concerns about elderly relatives, and some simply to enjoy the feeling of genuine belonging. With each gathering, Arthur marveled at the stories that emerged when people felt truly heard and accepted. Stories of loneliness, of fears, but also of small, everyday heroics and quiet kindness. "You know what impresses me most?" Eleanor said one afternoon after one of the meetings. "How everyone has their own version of an injured goldfinch, something small but important that needs care." Arthur nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. Everyone had something fragile that needed protecting, and everyone had the capacity to be someone's guardian, if only they paid attention to the signs. 6 months after the first desperate chirp that changed everything, Arthur found himself once again in his kitchen at breakfast time. But now, instead of the solitary silence of before, his morning was punctuated by the joyful sounds of the goldfinches in the yard and the arrival of Eleanor for their shared coffee. "Good morning, family," she said, entering through the back door that now remained always unlocked between the 2 houses. Arthur smiled, an expression that had become natural on his face. "Good morning. The coffee's ready." They sat together at the table, watching the activity in the yard through the window. The original goldfinch family had grown, and now several generations flew among the trees, creating a morning symphony that had become the soundtrack of their lives. "Do you remember what it was like before?" asked Eleanor, stirring sugar into her cup. Arthur reflected for a moment. "I remember thinking I was fine, that I didn't need anything or anyone. And now I realize I was just existing, not living." Just then, Rose appeared at the door, as she did every morning since the Goldfinch Gathering had become an integral part of their lives. "Good morning, dears. Guess who I ran into at the bakery?" Behind her appeared Dr. Bennet, the veterinarian who had advised Arthur on how to care for the injured goldfinch, and her teenage son, Leo. "They want to join our group," Rose announced cheerfully. "It's true," said Dr. Bennet. "Leo here has been going through a tough time at school, and I thought being around you all might help him better understand care and community." The young Leo, seemingly shy, looked with interest at the birds in the yard. Can I see where they make their nests?" he asked hesitantly. Arthur stood up immediately. "Of course. I'll show you. There's a whole new family that arrived last week." As the two went out into the yard, Eleanor and the other women exchanged understanding glances. "Another one who needs to learn he's not alone in the world," murmured Eleanor. Outside, Arthur pointed to the nests in the trees, patiently explaining to Leo about the goldfinch's habits, how they cared for each other, and the importance of persistence and attention to detail. "It's amazing how they don't give up," commented Leo, watching a goldfinch patiently feed its chicks. "Not at all," Arthur agreed. "And you know what? People can be like that too, when they choose to truly care." That afternoon, during the weekly gathering in the yard, the group had grown to 15 people. There were stories being shared, advice being exchanged, and a palpable sense that every person there genuinely belonged to this impromptu community. "I'd like to make a toast," said Arthur suddenly, raising his coffee cup. Everyone looked at him with curiosity, as he rarely took the initiative in public moments, to a little goldfinch who refused to give up when someone needed help, and to all of us who have learned that paying attention to one another isn't just kindness, it's what makes us truly alive. The group raised their cups in unison, and at that moment, as if responding to the toast, the original goldfinch landed on the branch nearest the group and let out a sequence of melodious chirps. "I think he approves," laughed Eleanor. "I think he's reminding us," said Arthur softly, "that saving each other is what we do best when we choose to pay attention." As the sun set on Hope Street, painting the sky in golden hues, the goldfinches sang their evening songs, and the group of neighbors who had become a family continued to share stories, laughter, and the quiet certainty that no one there would face life's hardships alone. Because sometimes all we need is someone or something, small but determined, who refuses to let us give up on ourselves. If this story touched your heart, leave a like and share it with someone who needs to know they're not alone. Tell us in the comments, have you ever had a goldfinch in your life, someone or something small that made all the difference? Let's spread more stories of hope and connection. Until next time.